Hello and welcome back. Let's finish up this black hole. Where we left it, we have all the fins attached and the motor mount in place. I'm going to start by working on the switch band on the electronics bay by applying a ring of epoxy and just working the switch band over until I get it aligned with the marks. Then I'm going to take a Q-tip soaked in denatured alcohol to clean up all the excess. Trying to make a nice sharp clean line as best as I can. Now let's go to the electronics bay. I'm using a 3D printed guide to give me an even distribution of 3 holes around this switch band. I'm using a 1/16 inch drill bit that I determined I needed from using a calculator from rocketrycalculator.com. These holes are used to equalize the pressure inside the electronics bay to the atmosphere. Now let's drill and mark 2 more holes for shear pins to hold the electronics bay into the lower airframe section to prevent premature separation during flight. I'm going to go ahead and tap the holes as well and pretend they don't get completely trashed the first time I ground test. Now I'm going to mark and drill 3 holes for push rivets at the top of the electronics bay to secure the electronics bay to the forward airframe. These rivets will secure the electronics bay to the rocket for the duration of the flight and need to be stronger than the shear pins holding the nose cone in place to be able to force the parachute out through the nose cone. Now let's work on the rail buttons. These hold the rocket to the launch tower. If I was planning far enough ahead, I would have marked these before I put the fins on. Now I'll just center the aluminum angle and mark both the left and right side of the channel, and I'll find the center of it later. I have the electronics bay in place, so I ensure I put the top rail button below to prevent interference. I start with a smaller bit and work my way up to larger bits. I just feel like I get less tear out this way. Now I use pliers to position a weld nut through the hole I just drilled and secure the rail button with a 632 screw. Now using a maroon Scotch-Brite pad, I'm going to prep the surface for the rear rail button. I'm going to epoxy it in place. Now I'm using some denatured alcohol and a blue paper towel to remove all the dust and clean the surface for the epoxy. Now I'll use some thickened West Systems epoxy to epoxy the bottom rail button in place. Now I'll make a small fillet around the outside of the rail button just to make sure it doesn't go anywhere. It's a little messy, so I'll use a Q-tip dipped in denatured alcohol to help clean it up. Now let's move to the nose cone. I'm going to take the coupler section and apply a bead of epoxy to the inside. I'm going to use a modified threaded PVC end cap where I ground down the ridges on the outside so that it fits snugly inside this coupler. I'm doing this because I want to be able to retain access to the nose cone because this will be a test bed for different projects. Now let's go to the nose cone. After dry fitting all the pieces, the nose cone, the coupler, and the top airframe section, getting the coupler adjusted to where I like it, I start marking my 2 spots to drill for shear pins to hold the nose cone in place during flight. I'll go ahead and tap these holes as well. I'll go ahead and place this screw before moving on to maintain alignment. And now I'm questioning why I don't have Phillips head screws. And now it's rinse and repeat on the backside for the second hole. And to secure the nose cone to the coupler, I'm going to use 3 shear pins. We're going to use the same tool, mark 3 holes, just as you've seen before. Once again, we will drill, we'll tap the hole, quick vacuum, and insert a screw. We'll rinse and repeat 2 more times to secure the nose cone. The shock cord I'm using to connect the bottom of the rocket to the streamer and the electronics bay is 950-pound Kevlar shock cord with sewn loops in each end and a third loop 2/3 of the way up the shock cord. It is 25 feet in length, and I will be using 500-pound rated swivels at every connection point. I attach the swivels to the shock cord by running the loop through one of the eyes of the swivel and then tucking the entire swivel through the loop. I'll take the longer end of the shock cord and run the retaining cord from the bottom of the rocket through the eye of the swivel, and then fish the entire shock cord through the eye that's created. And then it creates a nice little munter hitch. Now let's go 2/3 of the way up that shock cord. We reach our middle eye where I'm going to put a beautiful 15-foot streamer. And now I'm going to use a soft link to attach the streamer to the shock cord. Now the end goes through the eye, and then the eye at the end goes over the flag, and this locks the soft link together. I'm going to use another soft link to connect the shock cord to the bottom of the electronics bay. And to go from the electronics bay to the nose cone, I've got a 15-foot section of shock cord. I'll do the same thing and put a swivel on each loop. This time we're going to start in the middle and attach the parachute. We're going to feed the lines of the parachute through the eye of the swivel, and we'll fish the rest of the shock cord through. Now I'll take the top airframe and slide the longer section of the shock cord through. I'll use another soft link to attach the swivel to the top of the electronics bay. I'll use another soft link to attach the last swivel to the nose cone. Now let's take a step back and go back to the electronics bay. Let's actually put some electronics inside. I modeled and 3D printed a sled that'll hold the egg timer quasar for a flight computer and GPS tracking and telemetry, and a 2S LiPo battery. I'm going to use some number 4x3/8 sheet metal screws to secure the egg timer quasar to the sled. Using metal screws next to the Wi-Fi antenna will throw off the tuning. I'll lose a little bit of range, but it's going to be acceptable. On the back of the sled, I have a little compartment to hold my 2S battery. We've got to get the E-matches out of the electronics bay somehow, so let's drill a couple more holes. I'll double check to make sure the wires fit. Now let's drill one more hole on the other side of the electronics bay. Now a quick cleanup and we're ready to assemble. Let's start assembling from the bottom. I'll start with the first bundle of shock cord, followed by the streamer, with the protected end facing the motor. Next we'll bundle in the rest of the shock cord and slide the electronics bay in. I will use my indexing mark to align the electronics bay with the shear pin holes, and I will secure it in place with the 2 shear pins. Now I'll secure the top airframe to the electronics bay using the push rivets. Now let's move to the top of the rocket. We'll stick the next bundle of shock cord in, followed by the parachute. If I was actually going to fly this, I would have a nice layer of dog barf before I stuff the parachute in to protect it from the ejection charges. Next, I'll stuff the remainder of the shock cord in and then top it off with the nose cone. I use the index mark to align all the holes. I'll secure the nose cone with 2 256 shear pins. Boy, do I need to find some Phillips shear pins. And this concludes the assembly of my black hole. Thanks for watching. I can't wait to bring you along for the maiden flight. And here's a picture of the completed rocket. We'll see you next time.